The restaurant occupied the penthouse floor of a building that had once housed the Kuwaiti embassy. Its windows offered an unobstructed view of Central Park, where the autumn trees blazed orange and gold against the fading light. Crystal decanters lined the bar like soldiers at attention. The sommelier's collection was rumored to include bottles worth more than most Manhattan apartments. This was the ambassador's table, where diplomats dined with hedge fund managers, where deals were struck that moved markets and toppled governments, where a single dinner could cost more than the average American earned in a month. Amara Okonkwo moved through this world like water through silk, present but unnoticed, essential but invisible. She was 27 years old, with skin the color of burnished mahogany and eyes that held secrets she'd learned to keep. Her server's uniform, crisp white blouse, black pencil skirt, sensible flats, was designed to erase any trace of individuality, and it worked. The guests saw only her function, the woman who poured their wine, cleared their plates, anticipated their needs before they voiced them. They never saw the person beneath the uniform. That was fine with Amara. Invisibility had become her armor. She collected empty champagne flutes from a table of investment bankers, celebrating a merger that had eliminated 4,000 jobs. Their laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings as they discussed vacation homes in the Hamptons. Amara's expression remained perfectly neutral, the mask she'd learned to wear in her first week, when she'd discovered that showing any reaction to the casual cruelty of the wealthy only made things worse. In the service corridor, she allowed herself a moment of stillness. She pulled out her phone and checked the balance in her checking account. $847 to $23. Her father's care facility in Lagos had sent another invoice that morning. The experimental treatment for his early-onset Alzheimer's cost $12,000 per month, money that had to be wired in a combination of US dollars, euros, and Nigerian naira, each conversion eating away at the total like termites consuming wood. Amara knew those conversion rates by heart. She knew the rates for 47 different currencies, updated daily in her mind like a stock ticker that never stopped running. She knew which banks offered the best transfer fees, which exchange services were trustworthy, which countries had currency controls that made moving money a labyrinthine nightmare. She knew because she'd spent 6 years learning everything there was to know about international finance. Dr. Amara Okonkwo, Ph.D. in International Economics from the London School of Economics 2022, Masters in Applied Mathematics from the University of Oxford 2019, former analyst at the Bank of England's Foreign Exchange Division, where she'd been the youngest person ever appointed to the Counterfeit Detection Unit, author of a paper on currency manipulation that had been cited in 3 separate investigations by the Financial Conduct Authority, recipient of the Royal Economic Society's Young Economist Award, the woman who had identified the flaw in the European Central Bank's stress testing methodology before anyone else even knew to look. That woman felt like a character from a book she'd read long ago. Vivid but fictional, real but unreachable. A ghost who haunted her dreams and disappeared with the morning light. The visa situation had destroyed everything. When her father's diagnosis came, Amara had flown home to Nigeria on what was supposed to be a 2-week emergency leave. She'd notified her supervisor, filed the proper paperwork, done everything by the book. But the UK Home Office had other ideas. A bureaucratic error, a misplaced form, a missed deadline, a clerk who couldn't be bothered to check twice, a system designed to process applications rather than understand circumstances, had resulted in her work visa being revoked. The appeal process took 11 months. By the time the mistake was discovered, by the time some faceless administrator acknowledged that yes, there had been an error, her position at the Bank of England had been filled. Her apartment in London had been rented to someone else. Her carefully constructed life had evaporated like morning fog on the Thames. She'd come to New York on a tourist visa, hoping to find work in finance. But without proper documentation, without the network of connections that made careers in her field possible, she'd found only closed doors and polite rejections. The tourist visa had become a student visa through a predatory language school that charged $8,000 for worthless classes. That visa allowed her to work 20 hours per week, legally. She worked 60, paid in cash, and prayed every night that no one would ask too many questions. The phone buzzed again. A message from the care facility. Payment overdue. Please remit immediately to avoid service interruption. Service interruption. Such a clinical phrase for what it really meant. Her father, alone in a room, forgetting who he was, with no one to remind him. Amara slipped the phone back into her pocket and returned to the floor. The private dining room was filling with tonight's guests, a party she'd been warned about during the pre-shift meeting. International Summit, the manager had called it, currency traders, central bank officials, very important people, very large tips if you don't screw up. She adjusted her posture, composed her face, and prepared to be invisible once more. Gregory Ashford III entered the room like a man who expected applause for the simple act of existing. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of permanent tan that came from winters in St. Bart's and summers in Monaco. His suit was Tom Ford, custom-tailored naturally, with functioning buttonholes on the sleeves that cost an extra $1,000 for the privilege of being hand-stitched. His cufflinks were vintage Cartier, passed down from a grandfather who had made his fortune exploiting workers in the Pennsylvania coal mines. And his smile was the smile of a man who had never in his life been told no. A smile that expected compliance, that assumed admiration, that had never once been challenged by someone he considered beneath him. The Forbes list estimated his net worth at $9.2 billion. What the Forbes list didn't estimate was how much of that fortune had been built on deception. Behind him came his entourage. Sebastian Crane, his chief of staff, a thin man with cold eyes who carried a leather briefcase as if it contained nuclear codes. Yuki Tanaka, representing the Bank of Japan, her conservative navy suit and precise movements marking her as someone who measured every word before speaking. And Richard Holloway, a name Amara recognized from the financial press, the architect of 3 currency crises that had impoverished millions while making his hedge fund billions. Amara moved forward with water glasses. She was furniture. She was air. She was nothing. Gregory Ashford. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I trust the journey was comfortable. Private aviation makes everything so much more civilized. He settled into the chair at the head of the table, the largest chair naturally, with a higher back than the others. Amara poured his water. He didn't acknowledge her existence. Gregory Ashford. We're here tonight to discuss the Meridian Protocol, the most ambitious currency arbitrage operation in history. By this time next month, we will have moved $47 billion through 17 different currency pairs, exploiting the regulatory gaps between 12 different jurisdictions. Yuki Tanaka. The Bank of Japan's participation remains contingent on certain assurances, Mr. Ashford. The exposure you're describing would be unprecedented. Gregory Ashford. Unprecedented profits require unprecedented risks, Ms. Tanaka, but I assure you the mathematical models are sound. Sebastian, the projections. Sebastian Crane opened his briefcase and distributed leather-bound folders to each guest. Amara, refilling water glasses, caught a glimpse of the numbers inside. Currency conversion rates, arbitrage calculations, profit projections that stretched into the billions, and something else, something that made her pulse quicken. The numbers were wrong, not obviously wrong, not the kind of error that would be caught by a casual observer or even a competent accountant, but wrong in ways that Amara's trained eye could detect instantly, like a forger's signature that looked perfect until you held it up to the light. Richard Holloway. The Indonesian rupiah position concerns me. The volatility models suggest Gregory Ashford. The models are proprietary, Richard, developed by the finest quantitative analysts money can buy. Trust me, the rupiah will move exactly as we predict. Amara retreated to the service station, her mind racing. She'd written her doctoral thesis on exactly this kind of operation, large-scale currency manipulation, disguised as legitimate arbitrage. The Meridian Protocol wasn't an investment strategy. It was a sophisticated fraud designed to extract billions from unwitting counterparties while leaving the perpetrators with plausible deniability. And based on what she'd seen in those folders, someone was going to lose everything. The dinner service continued. Amara took their orders: Wagyu carpaccio, black truffle risotto, Dover sole meuniere, while her brain worked on a different problem entirely. She watched Gregory Ashford hold court, his confidence absolute, his charm weaponized. She watched Sebastian Crane's eyes flick nervously toward his boss whenever difficult questions arose. She watched Yuki Tanaka's growing unease, poorly hidden behind diplomatic composure. And she noticed something else. When the sommelier presented the wine list, Gregory Ashford made a show of selecting a 1982 Chateau Margaux, $4,000 per bottle. But when the check eventually came, Amara knew he would pay with something other than a credit card. Because Gregory Ashford III had a reputation in certain circles, a reputation for carrying exotic foreign currencies and using them to pay bills at establishments where the staff wouldn't know the difference between genuine notes and clever forgeries, where a waitress would see colorful foreign money, accept whatever exchange rate he dictated, and never realize she'd been cheated. He'd done it at restaurants across the city. Amara had heard the stories from other servers, the charming billionaire who paid in Swiss francs or Singapore dollars, always calculating the exchange rate himself, always leaving what seemed like a generous tip, but was actually a fraction of what was owed. The small con was almost elegant in its cruelty. A man worth $9 billion, stealing from waitresses who earned $5 to $35 per hour plus tips. Amara felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, something else. Anticipation. Amara stood in the narrow passage between the kitchen and the dining room, her back against the cool wall. In her hand was a small notepad, the kind servers used for taking orders, but instead of menu items, she'd filled the pages with numbers, currency conversion rates, arbitrage calculations, the mathematical fingerprints of fraud. The Meridian Protocol, as presented in those leather folders, claimed to exploit natural inefficiencies in global currency markets. The basic principle was legitimate. Currencies sometimes traded at slightly different prices in different markets, and sophisticated traders could profit by buying low in one market and selling high in another. But the numbers in Ashford's projections didn't reflect real market conditions. They reflected fantasy. Amara had noticed it immediately. The Indonesian rupiah rates were based on exchange windows that hadn't existed for 3 years since the Indonesian Central Bank had implemented new trading restrictions under the Gisdor Plus system. The Swiss franc projections ignored the currency floor that had been maintained by the Swiss National Bank since 2011, when they'd intervened to prevent the franc from appreciating beyond 1.20 to the euro. The Nigerian Naira calculations, and this was what had truly caught her attention, used conversion rates that would only be possible if someone had inside access to the Central Bank of Nigeria's intervention schedule, rates that fluctuated within a specific band that was supposed to be confidential, rates that no legitimate analyst could have obtained without corruption. Either Gregory Ashford's finest quantitative analysts were incompetent, or the Meridian Protocol was designed to fail. Designed to fail for everyone except Gregory Ashford. She closed her eyes, reconstructing the documents from memory. Her eidetic recall for numbers, a gift that had made her legendary at the Bank of England, captured every figure, every decimal point, every carefully constructed lie. The pattern was elegant in its deception. The protocol would generate genuine profits for the first 3 months, building confidence among the investors. Then, in month 4, a series of unexpected currency movements would trigger catastrophic losses. Except, they wouldn't be unexpected. They would be orchestrated. Amara's pen moved faster across the notepad. The losses would be absorbed by outside investors, the Bank of Japan, Holloway's hedge fund, and presumably others who weren't present tonight. But Ashford's company would have already taken its management fees, and the failed currency positions would somehow end up benefiting a network of shell companies that, she was willing to bet, led directly back to Gregory Ashford III. It was a pump-and-dump scheme dressed in the language of high finance, and it was going to steal billions. Manager, OS. Okonkwo, Table 7 needs the dessert course. Amara pocketed the notepad and collected the dessert plates. She moved back into the dining room, her face composed into the blank professionalism the job required, but her mind was still working. She served the chocolate soufflé to Gregory Ashford, the creme brulee to Yuki Tanaka, the cheese course to Richard Holloway. With each plate, she positioned herself to hear fragments of their conversation. Gregory Ashford. The beauty of the Meridian Protocol is its complexity. By the time regulators understand what happened, if they ever do, the money will have moved through so many jurisdictions that recovery will be impossible. Yuki Tanaka. The Bank of Japan's exposure would be significant. Our compliance department will require extensive documentation. Gregory Ashford. Documentation is Sebastian's specialty. Every transaction will be fully compliant, on paper at least. He laughed. Sebastian Crane smiled thinly. Yuki Tanaka's expression flickered with something that might have been doubt. Amara cleared the dessert plates and retreated to prepare the check. As she worked, she thought about what she'd heard and seen. The Meridian Protocol would devastate pension funds, retirement accounts, ordinary people who had trusted institutions like the Bank of Japan to protect their savings. People like her father, whose care facility was funded by a Nigerian pension system that had already been looted once by men exactly like Gregory Ashford. The check came to $8,743. Before tip, before tax. Amara carried it to the table on a silver tray. Gregory Ashford accepted it with the casual disregard of a man for whom such numbers were rounding errors. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a leather wallet, and from that wallet he produced a stack of colorful currency, Brunei dollars, the currency of a tiny Southeast Asian nation with a population smaller than San Francisco. Gregory Ashford. I hope you don't mind. I've just returned from a business trip and haven't had time to convert my currency. Let me see. The exchange rate is approximately 2 Brunei dollars to 1 US dollar, so... He began counting out bills with theatrical slowness, his smile widening as he watched the young black waitress, who surely couldn't know the difference. Amara felt her heart rate slow, her vision sharpened. Everything she'd spent 6 years learning, every currency she'd tracked, every exchange rate she'd memorized, every manipulation she'd studied, crystallized into perfect clarity. Gregory Ashford had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Gregory Ashford. Let's call it 18,000 Brunei dollars. That should more than cover the bill and a generous tip for our lovely server. He pushed the stack of bills toward Amara with the condescending smile of a man who had performed this trick 100 times before. The other guests barely glanced up. Currency mechanics were beneath their attention. Amara did not touch the money. Amara, I appreciate the offer, Mr. Ashford, but I'm afraid there are several problems with this payment. Her voice was soft but clear, accented with the precise diction of a British education layered over Nigerian roots. Every head at the table turned. Gregory Ashford. Problems? The money's right there. Brunei dollars. Perfectly good currency. Amara. First, the exchange rate. You quoted 2 Brunei dollars to 1 US dollar. The actual rate, as of market close today, is 1.34 Brunei dollars to 1 US dollar. The Brunei dollar is pegged to the Singapore dollar at par and has been since 1967 under the Currency Interchangeability Agreement. At the correct rate, your 18,000 Brunei dollars is worth approximately 13,400 US dollars, which would actually overpay the bill. Gregory Ashford's smile flickered. His eyes narrowed. Gregory Ashford. I see you've done your homework, but exchange rates fluctuate. Amara. The Brunei-Singapore peg doesn't fluctuate. It's one of the most stable currency arrangements in the world, maintained by both central banks as a matter of national policy. But that's not the primary problem. She reached out and picked up one of the bills, a $50 note featuring Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah. Amara. The primary problem is that this bill is counterfeit. Silence crashed over the table like a wave. The kind of silence that precedes earthquakes, that fills the space before lightning strikes. Gregory Ashford's champagne glass paused halfway to his lips. Sebastian Crane's hand froze over his briefcase. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to dim, as if the very building was holding its breath. Gregory Ashford. That's absurd. Those bills came directly from a Bruneian bank. Amara. The polymer substrate is correct, but the security thread is wrong. Genuine Brunei dollars issued after 2011 use a color-shifting kinogram thread that displays BND when tilted at a 45-degree angle. This thread shows BN only, a known characteristic of counterfeits produced by a syndicate in Malaysia that was shut down in 2019. Also, the watermark of the Sultan is slightly too large, 3 millimeters wider than specification, which causes the registration with the holographic element to be off by exactly that amount. The microprinting along the border reads, Autorité Monétaire Brunei Darussalam, but the spacing between letters is inconsistent, 0.3 millimeters too wide in the third word. She set the bill down on the table and met Gregory Ashford's eyes directly. His face had gone pale beneath his expensive tan. Amara. I spent 3 years at the Bank of England analyzing counterfeit currency for the Financial Crimes Unit. I've examined over 40,000 suspect notes from every issuing authority in the world, from the U.S. Federal Reserve to the Central Bank of Zimbabwe, from the European Central Bank to the Monetary Authority of Singapore. I know what genuine Brunei dollars look like. I know what genuine currency from 187 different issuing authorities looks like. And these are not genuine Brunei dollars. Sebastian Crane. Mr. Ashford, perhaps we should simply pay with a card. Amara. I'm not finished. Her voice carried an authority that made Sebastian Crane stop mid-sentence. The other guests were staring now. Yuki Tanaka, with growing alarm, Richard Holloway with the sharp attention of a predator, sensing weakness. Amara. I've also had the opportunity to observe your business discussions this evening. The Meridian Protocol you've described is not a currency arbitrage strategy. It's a sophisticated fraud designed to extract approximately $11 billion from your investors over a period of 6 months. Gregory Ashford. This is outrageous. Amara. The Indonesian rupiah projections in your materials use exchange windows that were eliminated in 2021 when Bank Indonesia implemented the Gisdor Plus system. The Swiss franc calculations ignore the currency floor, maintained by the Swiss National Bank. And the Nigerian naira figures, my particular area of expertise, assume intervention patterns that would only be knowable if someone had corrupt access to the Central Bank of Nigeria's trading desk. She pulled her notepad from her pocket and set it on the table. Amara, I've documented the mathematical inconsistencies. The losses will be absorbed by outside investors, including Ms. Tanaka, the Bank of Japan's pension funds, while Mr. Ashford's management fees and strategically positioned short positions will generate profits of approximately $2.3 billion for entities he controls. Yuki Tanaka. Is this true? Gregory Ashford. Of course it's not true. She's a waitress. He stopped himself, but not quickly enough. The word he'd been about to say hung in the air like poison. Amara. A waitress, yes. I'm also Dr. Amara Okonkwo, Ph.D. in International Economics from the London School of Economics, class of 2022. Summa cum laude. Former analyst at the Bank of England's Foreign Exchange Division, where I spent 3 years in the Counterfeit Detection Unit. Author of Currency Manipulation in Emerging Markets, Detection Methodologies and Regulatory Responses, which was cited in the Financial Conduct Authority's investigation of the LIBOR scandal, and referenced in 2 European central bank policy papers. She straightened to her full height, 5'10" without heels, and looked at Gregory Ashford with the calm certainty of someone who had spent her career seeing through men exactly like him. Amara, you tried to cheat me with counterfeit currency because you assumed a black woman in a server's uniform couldn't possibly know the difference. But I know the difference between genuine and counterfeit, between legitimate arbitrage and criminal fraud, and between a man who earned his wealth and a man who stole it. Richard Holloway. These are serious allegations, Ashford. If your projections are falsified, Gregory Ashford, they're not falsified. This woman is delusional. Security. Yuki Tanaka. No, I want to hear more. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of an institution that moved trillions of dollars daily. Gregory Ashford fell silent. Yuki Tanaka. Dr. Okonkwo, the Indonesian rupiah discrepancy you mentioned, can you elaborate? Amara nodded and began explaining. The technical details of currency trading windows, the specific regulatory changes that had invalidated Ashford's projections, the mathematical proof that the Meridian Protocol was designed to fail. She spoke for 7 minutes, without notes, citing exchange rates and regulatory dates from memory. When she finished, Yuki Tanaka was already on her phone, speaking rapidly in Japanese to someone in Tokyo. Sebastian Crane had closed his briefcase and was edging toward the door, and Gregory Ashford III, for the first time in his life, looked afraid. The collapse came faster than Amara had anticipated. Yuki Tanaka's phone call had triggered a cascade of events that moved at the speed of modern finance, which was to say instantaneously. Within 20 minutes, the Bank of Japan had frozen all pending transactions related to the Meridian Protocol. Within 30, Richard Holloway's compliance team had begun an emergency audit of every document Ashford had ever provided. Within 45, someone had contacted the SEC. Sebastian Crane was stopped at the elevator by restaurant security, his briefcase full of documents that would later prove crucial to the investigation. And Gregory Ashford III sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the wreckage of his carefully constructed fraud, watching his empire crumble. Richard Holloway. I trusted you, Gregory. My fund trusted you. We were prepared to invest $800 million based on your projections. Gregory Ashford. Richard, you have to understand, the market conditions, the models were based on assumptions that... Richard Holloway. The models were based on lies. The waitress proved that in 10 minutes. What does that say about your finest quantitative analysts? Federal agents arrived at 11:47 p.m. They were polite but firm, their blue FBI windbreakers stark against the restaurant's elegant decor. 2 agents for Ashford, 2 for Sebastian Crane, a team of forensic accountants waiting in vans outside to begin processing the evidence. Gregory Ashford was escorted from the building in handcuffs, a sight that would lead every financial news broadcast by morning, that would be shared millions of times on social media, that would become the defining image of corporate fraud for a generation. His Tom Ford suit was rumpled. His vintage Cartier cufflinks caught the light of the camera flashes. His smile, that practiced predatory smile, had vanished entirely, replaced by the hollow expression of a man watching his entire world collapse. The counterfeit Brunei dollars were bagged as evidence. The documents in Sebastian Crane's briefcase were seized. The leather folders containing the Meridian Protocol projections were photographed, cataloged, and carried away to become exhibits in what prosecutors would later call one of the most brazen financial frauds in a generation. And in the chaos, Amara found herself standing where she had been all evening, near the wall, in her server's uniform, invisible to everyone rushing past. Almost everyone. Yuki Tanaka. Dr. Okonkwo. Amara turned. The Japanese banker was approaching, with an expression that mixed respect with something deeper. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement of one professional by another. Yuki Tanaka. You just prevented losses that would have devastated retirement funds for millions of Japanese citizens. The Bank of Japan does not forget such debts. Amara. I only told the truth. Yuki Tanaka. The truth in the right hands is the most powerful weapon in the world. They'd moved to a quieter space, the manager's private office with its leather chairs and framed photographs of celebrity guests. Richard Holloway had asked to speak with her. Yuki Tanaka had stayed as well, declining the FBI's invitation to leave, insisting she had business to conclude first. Amara sat across from them, still in her server's uniform, aware of the surreal nature of the moment. An hour ago, she had been invisible. Now, two of the most powerful people in global finance were waiting for her to speak. Richard Holloway. I need to understand. Who are you really? How does someone with a PhD from the LSE end up serving dinner in Manhattan? Amara was quiet for a moment. The question cut to the heart of everything she'd lost. Amara. My father was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years ago. He's in a care facility in Lagos, one of the few that offers the kind of treatment that might slow the progression. The cost is $12,000 per month. I had a position at the Bank of England, but when I went home to help with his care, a bureaucratic error cost me my work visa. By the time it was resolved, my position was gone. My life in London was gone. She looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, a city of infinite wealth that had no place for her. Amara. I came here hoping to rebuild, but without proper documentation, without connections, without the luxury of waiting for the right opportunity, I found closed doors. The only people willing to hire me were restaurants where they don't ask too many questions and pay in cash. So I serve dinner to people who don't see me, and I send every dollar I can to Nigeria, and I try to keep my father alive long enough for him to remember who I am. The room was silent. Yuki Tanaka's expression had softened into something like recognition, the understanding that brilliance could be buried by circumstance, that potential could be crushed by systems that valued paperwork over people. Richard Holloway. Tonight, I watched you dismantle a $9 billion fraud in under 10 minutes, using knowledge you carry in your head. While wearing a server's apron, he stood, walking to the window. Richard Holloway. I've spent 40 years in finance. I've hired thousands of analysts. I've paid millions in recruiting fees to find people who can spot fraud before it happens. And the most extraordinary mind I've encountered was standing right next to me, refilling my water glass. Yuki Tanaka. The Bank of Japan would like to offer you a position. Our foreign exchange analysis division needs someone with your capabilities. Richard Holloway. With respect, Yuki, I believe I can make a more compelling offer. Richard Holloway. Holloway Capital is establishing a new division, fraud detection and currency analysis. After tonight, it's obvious that we need someone who can see what others miss. Someone who can identify manipulation before it costs us billions. He turned to face Amara directly. Richard Holloway. I want you to lead it, Director of Currency. Intelligence, full authority over our verification protocols. Direct reporting to me. Amara felt the ground shifting beneath her. The words didn't seem real. A fantasy she'd imagined during late nights at the restaurant, when her feet ached and her dreams felt impossibly far away. Amara. What would that entail? Richard Holloway. Base salary of $750,000 annually. Equity stake in the division, 3%, vesting over 4 years. Full medical coverage for you and any family members, including international coverage for your father's treatment in Lagos, whatever facility, whatever treatment, whatever he needs. Our legal team will handle your visa situation. H-1B initially, with a clear path to permanent residency. We have immigration attorneys who have never lost a case. He paused, studying her face, looking for the reaction that would tell him whether he'd offered enough. Richard Holloway. And the first thing we'll do is pay off your father's outstanding medical bills, all of them. Consider it an advance on the value you've already provided, because tonight you saved my fund from catastrophic losses. That's worth far more than $12,000. Amara's breath caught. The numbers she'd been running in her head, $847.23 in checking, $12,000 per month for care. The endless calculation of how many shifts it would take to survive another week. suddenly dissolved like fog in sunlight. Amara, I have conditions. Richard Holloway. Name them. Amara, full independence. I report to you, not to a committee. If I identify fraud, my finding is final. No pressure to overlook irregularities for the sake of profitable relationships. The truth comes first, regardless of consequences. Richard Holloway. If I wanted someone who would tell me what I wanted to hear, I would have hired an MBA. Done. Amara, and a scholarship fund for students from developing countries pursuing advanced degrees in economics and finance, students who might otherwise be stopped by visa issues or financial constraints. Named after my father, the Dr. Emmanuel Okonkwo Fellowship for International Economics. Richard Holloway smiled, not the calculated smile of a businessman closing a deal, but something genuine, something that recognized the full weight of what he was witnessing. Richard Holloway. We'll fund it. $500,000 annually, administered by the London School of Economics. Your alma mater should be involved in building your legacy. Amara looked at the man who, an hour ago, had been just another wealthy face she'd served without acknowledgement. The world had shifted on its axis. The invisible woman had been seen. Amara, I'll need to give 2 weeks' notice at the restaurant. Richard Holloway. Take a month, visit your father, tell him what his daughter has accomplished, and when you're ready, we'll change the world together. Amara shook his hand. Her grip was steady, her eyes were clear, and, in her mind, the currency calculations finally stopped, replaced by something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope.